Hi friends, I'm Jen from Snapdragon Quilting. Thank you for joining me in my studio today. Today I want to talk about reverse applique. When we are traditionally making quilts, we stitch squares, triangles, rectangles together, which we can do because they have straight edges. But what happens when we want to use an odd shape or a curved edge in a quilt? That's where applique can come in, and today I'm going to show you reverse applique. So in traditional applique, we take the leaf or the flower petal, the shape that we're making, and we stitch it on top. But in reverse applique, we actually cut out a window and then put that design underneath through the window. So let's get started. The quilt that I'm using this technique for is my Mini Moons quilt. I've got it made up in two different versions here. Both layouts are in the pattern, and it's lots of fun, so I hope you like it. There are a few things that you'll need to do this technique. One is the background fabric that you're going to use. So this is the fabric that I'm going to put the applique behind. And then you're of course going to need fabric to fill the shape or fill the window that you cut. Freezer paper is the other thing. Freezer paper is something that's found in like the kitchen section at your grocery store or at Walmart or Target. This paper is really unique because on one side it's paper, but on the other side it's plastic. And in the quilting world, we can draw our shapes that we're going to use for our reverse applique on the paper side, and then we can iron this onto fabric, and the plastic will melt just slightly, adhere to the fabric, and then you can peel it off and use it again and again. With this project, I used 4 of these and I got through the whole project. So after you use them 5 or 6 times, you replace them. For this project, you're also going to need some just plain old regular Elmer's school glue. I like to put mine in a bottle that has a little fine tip, and there's links for this online. I am going to be using a circle shape, so I also have my Circle Savvy ruler. But of course, we have lots of things in our houses that have circles, thread, cups, plates. So if you're making a circle, you just need something to give you that circle.
Okay, so the first thing we need to do is create a hole in our freezer paper that is the shape of what we want to reverse applique. I'm doing circles, so I'm going to make a circle. Let me show you how I do this. So I take my square of freezer paper, and if I were tracing, I would put my cup on and I would take a pencil and I would trace. I don't recommend using pen because the last thing you want is pen all over your iron. So take a pencil and trace your shape and then cut it out. I am going to use the Circle Savvy ruler to cut a circle, and to do that I'm going to fold my square in half twice. Perfect. And then I'm going to take my ruler, and this paper is going to keep popping up, so you got to kind of nail it down, line it up on the fold lines. I've got a fold here and a fold along this edge, and then I'm going to take my rotary cutter and hold it up against the inner edge of the lip in the ruler. The ruler has slots in it, so I'm going to just cut through that slot along the inner edge to create my circle template. And there it is. Now we're going to take our freezer paper template and we're going to iron it onto the fabric that will be the background for our applique. So this is the fabric that will surround the circle, and then this is my fabric that will be the circle. So we want the background fabric. Sometimes I call this the frame too, because it will frame our shape, our applique shape. So we've got the wrong side up, and then I'm going to put the plastic side of the freezer paper onto the wrong side. So plastic side down, and then I'm going to take a hot iron. I've got this set on my cotton setting, and it doesn't take very long to get that freezer paper to stick. So I don't know, just maybe 2 seconds, and I worked all the way around, and you can see it's on there really nicely. As the freezer paper gets used over and over again, sometimes I find I have to iron it a little bit longer to make it stick. But you can see if I go and peel this corner off, the freezer paper comes right off. And so you can use these templates again and again. All right, so let's move on. The next step is we need to trim out this fabric here so that we have our window. We're going to make a window. So I've got my fabric scissors here, and I think the easiest way to do this is to just kind of fold it in half. Now I'm leaving quite a bit of fabric here on the edge, roughly a half an inch, maybe slightly more. And you don't want to cut this too close. We need that, that space. So this piece could go in your scrap bin. You don't need that piece. So we've cut out our window, and now we need to clip towards the freezer paper. And we don't want to get too close, because if you get too close, then our fabric will start to fray. So I'm going maybe an eighth of an inch away from the edge. And one trick is I like to keep the tip of my scissors away from the edge of the freezer paper so I don't accidentally cut it too far. And I'm going to work my way all the way around making clips. And the clips, you don't want them, oh, that one's thick right there. You don't want them too far apart, but you also don't want to make, okay, my scissors, the tip is dull. We're going to go this way. There it goes. I'm just going to have to be really careful. Anyway, we don't want them to be really tiny, and we don't want them to be huge. I'm going a little bit smaller than a quarter of an inch here. And we want to keep our scissors perpendicular to the edge of that shape. So sometimes I'll go through and I'll just put one over here, and then I'll kind of work my way in. But as you do this more, it's a little bit easier to keep your scissors perpendicular. And I'm just going to keep working my way all the way around until I get back to the start. Perfect. Okay, so I have cut these little flaps, and what we're going to do next is we are going to iron all of these back using this edge of our freezer paper, and this is what's going to create that perfect shape. So I like to use starch. I have some Best Press here, so let's use Best Press. And you can use liquid starch here too, and like a paintbrush, and kind of paint this onto these little flaps. The downside with spraying is your freezer paper is going to get wet and it's going to warp a little bit, but that doesn't really bother me. When my templates start to get too warped, then I just make a new one. I'm using Best Press here. I also like to use just heavy duty regular spray starch like Faultless. And then this is the part where you want to be really careful here. So you're going to pull these tabs back against the edge of your freezer paper and iron the tabs. And this is why I like to leave my tabs a little bit long so I can actually hold on to them. And now you can see here I haven't quite cut close enough to this edge, and so when I'm pulling this back, it's flattening out my curve, and I don't want that. I want that curve really round. So I'm going to go in here again and cut some of these just a teeny bit closer, and it'll do that too if your tabs are too wide. So if you're having that happen, you can always go in and cut narrower tabs. Perfect. Okay, now when I pull this back, I can feel it coming up against the freezer paper. That looks a lot better in that spot. I might have to do it again because the tip of my scissors weren't cutting. Usually that you just, there it goes. I was afraid to get too close to that edge, but unfortunately you do have to get within about an eighth of an inch to get the fabric to smooth, make that smooth curve. And this part is really important to get our curve smooth because this is where we're going to stitch. We're actually going to stitch right into that fold there that we're making. And so this is a good time to be really particular and to make this as smooth as you can get it. If that's the look you're going for, I should say. Okay, I'm going to just clip those a smidge closer because they were not going as smooth as I wanted. I want that curve really smooth. And I like to work in sections, just slowly working my way around. I have to go get my scissors sharpened, get that tip to cut better. Okay, I keep putting them in a little bit closer. And I can feel that paper Making sure I'm getting that right up against the edge there. These are just not quite as close as I want them. I'm even going to put an extra one in there. Make the tabs a little narrower and closer to the edge, and that will make your curve even smoother. Okay, that's looking pretty good. And like I said, this is the part to be really picky on. So I'm actually going to flip this over and look at it from the front too. And you'll see I've got a little bit of starch coming through to the front. I don't mind. Starch washes out. If it darkens the fabric there a little bit, I am okay with that. But if that bothers you, use the liquid starch and just paint it on your tabs. Yeah, that spot was looking a little flat from the front, so I'm going to see if I can get that a smidge closer, and it does, and pull it back some. And you can already see my freezer paper is starting to warp because I sprayed it with my best press. But I can always make new ones. It doesn't bother me. If that bothers you, don't spray your freezer paper. Okay, I like that. That is looking really good. So once this cools, then we can go ahead and peel this freezer paper off. Oh, and it is pulling off this fabric unravels really easily, this fabric I'm working with. So it's actually sticking to those threads on that side. Okay, pulled out some of my threads. That is okay. So we want to take that freezer paper off, and mine is still just a little bit damp from the starch that I used, so I'm going to dry it out a little bit more with my iron. Get that starch to really dry out. And then we are going to take our fabric that we're using for the background, and we're going to put it underneath so we have a little window. So you can see how this is going to lay. Now it's really important that we have enough of this fabric to work a seam. We need a 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way around. So I'm feeling right here on these sides, and I can feel the inner lip of the circle that I've made. This needs to go just a little bit more to the right to be even. Yes, so now I have a 1/4 inch of fabric all the way around the window that we made. And once we've checked that, the next step is to take our Elmer's glue, and you don't need very much glue here. I like to use just a small bead all the way around, and I like to work in sections, so I'm going to put this section down here. And I also really want to get that to line up because I'm using 4 different colors here, so I want my seam to match. Okay, and then we're going to work again around here, just using a little bit of glue. If you use a lot of glue, then what's going to happen is it's going to seep around to the front, or it's going to get underneath your tabs and glue your tabs back. But we don't want that. We want to be able to lift our tabs up. If you do put a lot of glue on and it ends up sticking, don't worry, it just pops right off, even if it's set. And I'm trying to keep this glue right on that inner edge of the fold that we've made. Perfect, okay. And now this is our chance again to be picky. So I'm going to flip this over to the front, and I can see that is not quite lined up. This is our chance to readjust. And while that glue is still wet, you can lift, even after the glue dries, you can still lift it up. But while it's wet, it's easy to just lift it up, reposition, get in close, take a look at it. I'm happy with that. And then you can leave this to dry, or you can use your iron to dry the glue so that it stays stuck. And I like to dry it from both sides. And now when you look at this, this should look exactly how you want it to look when it's done stitching. If you're not happy with it, this is your chance to pull it apart, mess with it, fix it up. All right, now let's take this to the sewing machine.
The final step of reverse applique is to actually stitch these fabrics together. And to do this, it's really simple. We're just going to lift up that top fabric and expose the fold that we've made and then stitch directly on that fold. If you're having a hard time seeing the fold, let's see if this light fabric, sometimes different fabrics, it's harder to see. But if you are having a hard time seeing that, then you can just take a marking pen, pencil, or chalk, and you can draw in that crease so it's a little bit easier to see. So we're just going to simply lift this up, and we want to stitch really slowly and really carefully. There's no rush when stitching this. And you know what? I'm going to change my foot because I don't need a 1/4 inch foot for this. Even though that's what I use for a lot of other stitching, I am going to use an open-toed foot instead because this creates a lot of visibility. And this open-toed foot that I'm using has a little not a 1/4 inch, excuse me, a marker right here in the middle. And that allows me to know the center, so where my needle is going to hit, and I can use that as a guide as we progress. Okay, now that I have the right foot on, I'm going to put my presser foot down, and I'm also going to stitch with my needle in the down position, and that's going to allow me to adjust the fabrics as we stitch. And let me slow it down a little bit. I want to go really slow, and I'm going to just carefully guide. Now, as I need to, I'm going to lift up that presser foot, and I'm going to adjust the fabrics because I don't want any puckers in here. And I'm going to slowly work my way around the crease. And you can see I'm starting to fold a little bit right here. So I'm going to lift up my foot, pull that little crease out, flatten it out. And as I'm sticking my finger under here, I'm taking my foot off the pedal too because I do not want to accidentally sew my finger. So safety first here. And then again, as I get to a point where the fabric isn't flat, I'm just going to lift up my foot, both of my feet, my presser foot and my actual foot, readjust and start stitching again. I'm going to just do this. This is the slow part. There's no rush here. We want to take our time, enjoy the process. Here are sewing machines. Feel the fabric. I like watching that needle go up and down too. No rush when we're stitching on a curve. This is a little different than stitching straight. I know you guys, a lot of you like to zoom right through those straight stitches or straight seams. But this one, really pause and adjust and enjoy as needed. Actually, I think that one's going to be okay. Yep. Moving on to the dark side here. A little bit harder to see. And you can see how that center marker on my open toe foot helps me adjust to, and I'm using that, I'm looking at that to help guide what's coming next. And I'm also going back and forth watching where my needle is landing, so I know when I need to readjust my fabric. But watching that guide really helps me keep my needle in the fold that we made. We're going to just keep going all the way around. I did shorten my back stitch just a smidge too, because when I'm working with a curve, I find I can make it smoother when I put more stitches in there. When I've got really big stitches, it can look a little bit flatter. So I turned it down to 2, and I got all the way back to where I started. Let's just do a couple back stitches. Awesome. Put the needle up, and we are done. Now that we have stitched in that little fold, we need to trim off the extra fabric. So I'm going to take my scissors and roughly trim the seam to 1/4 inch all the way around. I'm being really careful that I'm not catching this top fabric here, so I'm holding it out of the way as I trim the tabs and the fabric underneath. I'm going slowly and carefully all the way around. Now you can see it didn't matter that I left those tabs long earlier because we're just trimming them off. And it was really nice to have them long while I needed them.
Now let me get rid of the scraps real quick. And I like to do one last press because as we stitched, you can see there's a little bit of creasing in this top fabric, which is okay, it comes right out. And I like to use best press to do this. And the nice thing about best press is that it has sizing in it. Sizing relaxes fabric, so it relaxes those finicky spots. Just spray a little bit on and then iron them out.
And the final step is to just trim up the block. And so I'm going to use my square ruler, and I don't have a ton of extra here to work with to keep my block the size I want it. So I'm barely gonna trim any off. Put that there again. And since I've got this half square triangle, I'm going to use my 45 on my ruler to match up that seam so I can keep it square with that. So I'm being real picky here, but okay, and we'll trim that off too. And there we have our block. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you enjoyed learning about reverse applique, making this block with me. Stay tuned for more great videos. And of course, if you like what you've seen, hit the subscribe button below. Happy quilting!